Napoleon Bonaparte. Doubtlessly one of the most important figures in the past few centuries and indeed throughout all history. His reign as the Emperor of France, which under him soon equated to Emperor of much of Europe, was remarkable, albeit expectedly quite difficult at times. One of his greatest challenges was securing an heir. It was a task that was constantly on his mind. Eventually, it would cause him to sacrifice his marriage with the woman whom he loved more than any other. And yet, the birth of Napoleon II in 1811 by his second wife amounted to much less than he had hoped. Napoleon was defeated in 1814 and again in 1815. In the aftermath, the throne went back to the Bourbon monarchy that the French Revolution had originally replaced in the form of Louis XVIII, Charles X, and Louis XIX, who reigned for literally about 20 minutes. The throne then went to the related July monarchy under Louis-Philippe I, but was then abolished and the Republic returned. Until, in 1852, a Bonaparte brought back the imperial monarchy again, this being Napoleon the Third. So what happened to Napoleon II in between the two? In this video we'll find out. Before we begin, I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters listed here who help make these videos possible. Napoleon I had a complicated love life. I'll do my best to summarize it and other events so that we can see how Napoleon II comes into the picture. Napoleon's first marriage occurred in 1796, shortly before his rise to glory. He married a woman known to history as Josephine de Beauharnais, the daughter of wealthy sugarcane planters from Martinique in the Caribbean. She was 32, 6 years older than Napoleon and already widowed with 2 children, a son, Eugene, and a daughter, Hortense. Napoleon seized control of the French government in 1799 and became emperor in 1804. Now, in a hereditary office of major importance, having an heir became a more pressing issue. Yet Josephine, for uncertain reasons, had not been able to become pregnant throughout their marriage. Now, as she entered her 40s, the outlook was not good. Napoleon formally adopted her son Eugene and had an unknown number of illegitimate children via mistresses. However, though Eugene achieved great position under his stepfather and would have made a suitable heir, the emphasis was of course on having a legitimate heir of his own blood. Thus, for the time being, Napoleon looked to his nephews as heirs. These were the sons of his brother, Louis, and his stepdaughter, Hortense, who married each other in 1802. Still, it was often on his mind that a direct heir provided the best certainty and legitimacy. In 1807, Hortense's firstborn son, who was Napoleon's primary consideration for heir, died. In 1809, an attempt on Napoleon's life was made, not for the first time. Due to incidents like these, the issue became more pressing as the years passed. In 1810, he felt his hand was forced. He divorced Josephine, and tried to kill 2 birds with 1 stone by marrying Marie-Louise, the daughter of his former enemy, the Austrian Emperor Francis I. She, in the words of Eduard von Wertheimer in his book The Duke of Reichstadt, considered Napoleon the Antichrist embodied. After meeting him, however, her attitude changed sharply and she quickly warmed up to him. Before long, she was the mother of Napoleon's only legitimate son. Napoleon François-Joseph Charles Bonaparte was born on March 20th, 1811. He was immediately named his father's heir and given the title King of Rome, a title traditionally given to the Holy Roman Emperors, which Napoleon considered up for grabs, given that he had helped cause the Holy Roman Empire to dissolve. The birth was difficult, however, nearly costing Marie-Louise her life, and thus they never tried again for another. 3 years later, however, fortune began to run out for Napoleon. His armies had been ravaged by his disastrous 1812 invasion of Russia and the battles fought the year after in the War of the Sixth Coalition. When Austrian, Prussian, and Russian forces reached and surrounded Paris in March of 1814, they demanded Napoleon abdicate, which he was forced to do on April 4th, 1814. Napoleon tried to abdicate in favor of his son, but the coalition would not accept this. They sought not only the defeat of Napoleon, but in fact everything that had happened since the French Revolution, and thus pressed him to not only renounce the throne for himself, but also his heirs. Napoleon II was not present at the time regardless. He and his mother had already, reluctantly, left Paris at Napoleon's order, saying he would rather that they end up at the bottom of the Seine River than the hands of the enemy. Ultimately, though, they ended up in Austria, following Napoleon's defeat. Napoleon II had not seen his father since January. He would never see him again. Napoleon II spent the remainder of his life in Austria, where he was brought up for the most part as an Austrian in the court of his grandfather, Francis, the Emperor of Austria. His very name, in fact, Napoleon, was awkwardly ignored. Instead, he was referred to as Franz, the German version of Francis, his second name. In 1814, after Napoleon's first defeat, Marie-Louise was made Duchess of Parma, Piacenza, and Guastalla. Accordingly, Napoleon II was named Prince of Parma. However, this was not much more than a title. The territories were to be given to the Bourbons after her death, who despised the Bonapartes far more than the Austrians and would never sleep comfortably at night were the young Napoleon to inherit them and find himself in a position of power. Marie-Louise would govern these territories alongside her new lover and eventual second husband, Adam Albert von Neipperg, who will be addressed in a moment. Famously, on March 20th of 1815, Napoleon returned to power. During his 100 days of resurgence, lasting until June of that year, he attempted to restore what had been lost. There was great fear in this time, namely in Vienna, that the little King of Rome might be abducted and taken to France, despite Marie-Louise's desire to now remain in Austria. Authorities throughout Austria were forbidden from allowing the passage of anyone matching his description. Napoleon was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo on June 18th. He was forced to abdicate once again on June 25th of that year. He was then exiled to the island of St. Helena. Once again, Napoleon had abdicated in favor of Napoleon II. The provisional government, headed by Joseph Fouché, did not recognize Napoleon's dynastic wishes, and indeed, Napoleon II was in Austria the entire time, but they were never formally denied until the return of Louis XVIII. So it is sometimes maintained that Napoleon II technically held the position of Emperor of the French from June 22nd to July 7th of 1815. The Congress of Vienna, however, was quite decided that the best guarantee for peace and stability in Europe was to return the Bourbon Louis XVIII to the French throne. In 1821, Napoleon I died. Among his final wishes were for his son to never forget that he was a Prince of France. When his father finally died, he was allowed to learn more about his story, which fascinated him and helped to shape his sense of identity for the rest of his life. He was not taught to zealously despise his father. Rather, he was given his family's honest opinion, that his father was a self-interested opportunist who rose to power on the back of chaos and was responsible for throwing Europe into further mayhem in the pursuit of his personal ambitions. Shortly after her legal husband's death, his mother, Marie-Louise, married the aforementioned Adam Albert von Neipperg, an Austrian general and politician who had fought against Napoleon and had been ordered to prevent attempted communication between the two. Despite remaining loyal to Napoleon for some time, much to the annoyance of her family in Vienna, to the point of trying to see him in his first exile on Elba, the Empress fell in love with the commander within the year after Napoleon's first downfall, and soon returned to hating Napoleon and the French. The couple would go on to have 3 children. In 1818, at the age of 7, Emperor Francis gave Napoleon II the title of Duke of Reichstadt. It was yet another mere title, as the leaders of Europe, including his own grandfather, were quite hesitant to give him any actual power, or even to let him go anywhere near France, even to the Italian territories governed by his mother, especially as it became clear as he aged that the apple had not fallen far from the tree. Despite very likely not having much memory of his father, he displayed the same interest in the military that his father had at his age. Thus, barred from Italy, he did not often see his mother, who was often in her territories there with von Neipperg, and thus he knew nothing of her affair with him for quite some time. He was raised by the Emperor Francis. However, he was not mistreated. The Austrians accepted him as one of their own, and protected him against the possibility of assassination attempts, which were a realistic concern given the number of royalists in France who were left uncomfortable by the boy's mere existence. Napoleon II grew to be a tall, intelligent, capable, and ambitious, albeit sickly young man who lived his life under the watchful eyes of Europe's masters, namely his family in Austria, who were hesitant to ever let him become anything. Though his grandparents supported him and cared for him dearly, this caused him to resent his family. He even began to insist on being called Napoleon. Napoleon II became close friends with Sophie of Bavaria around this time, the unhappy wife of the Archduke Franz Karl, son of the Emperor Franz. Quite close friends. In 1831, at the age of 20, the emperor allowed him to take command of an Austrian battalion, but it came too late. His health had begun deteriorating in his teenage years and was now quite poor. Napoleon II caught tuberculosis in 1832 and died on July 22nd of that year, aged 21. The short life of Napoleon II was an unfortunate one. As he neared his death, he is recorded to have said, "Must I end so young a life that is useless and without a name? My birth and my death. That is my whole story." He was clearly a young man with great talent and potential, much like his father. Too much like his father. And Europe could see it. In fact, after his death he was called l'Aiglon, the eaglet. His complicated origins left him well cared for, but barred from any chance to ever prove himself. 2 weeks after his death, Princess Sophie had a son, Maximilian, who would go on to become Emperor of Mexico. Some have speculated that this was not the son of the husband for whom she had little affection, but rather of her friend, at whose premature death she had very much grieved. It's an interesting notion, although his similarity in appearance to the Archduke makes me very much doubt it. And so there is one final question. I mentioned the Bonapartes returned when Napoleon III rose to power in 1848. Who was he if Napoleon II died, probably childless, in obscurity? Napoleon III was the son of Napoleon's brother, Louis, and his stepdaughter, Hortense. Thus, in a sense, Napoleon was succeeded by a nephew after all. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, I invite you to come check out the rest of Fire of Learning and to subscribe to see more videos like this in the future. To help support the channel, there is a link to my Patreon page in the description. I'd like to thank my current patrons, listed here once again, for their support. Fire of Learning is also on Instagram, and I have a science channel much like this called Lucinox. Thank you for watching.